So yeah, like the actual city that it's based on is also like a very cool, beautiful place that I love. So if it has like little trappings of that too, even if it's like loosely inspired by Paris, like I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've convinced myself that this is going to be cool. Although I think there's still some reasonable questions that people are asking. Like one that is going around is, you know, when you see storefronts, shops,
Can you go into
can you
those?
actually go in, or do you just press a button at the door and like a menu pops up? I'm pretty reasonable about like, you know, you don't have to go into everything. But again, like when you look at the map of the city, which they put out, it's a beautiful map. Like it's really something that you want to like think about and ponder the possibilities. The size is smaller than all of those big open areas. So I've just convinced myself, like surely they are taking advantage of the more compact space to put little interesting things in all these places
Density
that you can look around.
Yeah.
I've convinced me, but that's really what I'm looking for here.
Not gross windows? Just kidding.
We have a whole other question about graphics later. We'll be coming back to that.
I'm kidding.
The other thing that really, for us, has attracted us to this game is the battle system, which is pretty different. Is it different enough for you? I think we have both been pretty vocal detractors of the traditional Pokemon battle system of kind of like not working for us anymore.
Bored of that. Yeah, so what we played was pretty interesting, where you do get a little bit of a sense of the battle system, where there's like very free movement, there's a bit more strategy involved. There's just a bit more like action for you as a player versus you just like pressing, you know, the tackle button or like the sleep button or whatever and waiting for the
your guys are kind of like the hook of a whole game around that feature.
This. Yeah. It's like there's so many other things for this game that could be a cool hook that is not just this Pokemon gets bigger, you know? It's stronger.
It's big now.
It's big now.
Yes. So let's go back to the graphics.
Yeah.
Are these graphics going to be a distraction for this game, or are we finally going to get over this conversation?
Well, I think it goes back to the idea of whether or not the game has personality.
Yeah.
It's less about, like, there's lots of games.
Well, does it from what you've seen?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. That's why I'm not, like, as concerned anymore. Like, I'm not going to look at every tree and be like, that's an ugly tree. That window looks fuzzy and gross.
You're not, but unfortunately, a lot of people are. Because this is now something people are fixated on for years and years and
now
years.
they've got to have the hot take about it.
So unfortunately, we're going to get that in at least the first week when this game comes out.
Here comes the comparison.
This game's probably going to leak soon.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot of debates, like, oh, let's compare these windows, let's compare the trees, and Game Freak has learned nothing, blah, 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 like all these things.
There's going to be discourse.
Yeah.
Capital D.
So I just want to move beyond this. So I hope that they can up it a little bit. Again, I'm not expecting like a complete revolution in the way this game looks.
I don't think it can.
We've seen the way the game looks. It's not that, but yeah, I do think just, you know, there's a basic bar for a presentation of a game, version of this game. I start to get a little worried when I think about that. But if it's like, well, it's for, you know, a 7-year-old who doesn't know any better and just wants to play the game, it's like, okay.
And then you probably can play it on a Switch, original Switch Lite.
And I also start to think about some of those new features that they have on the Switch, like the game share, game beaming stuff, where it's like, oh, okay, well, we're not going to sell you a new system, but you can beam the game to somebody and they can play along with you that way. Like that's
true. That's a good
I'm sure they're thinking, like, well, what is the solution? How do we make up this time, this opportunity with price-conscious younger players that we, due to economics, unfortunately just can't do?
Don't have it.
Here's another question. Are they going to release 2 versions of the next game? Are people going to be buying that at $80 a pop?
I don't think they can do that.
Right.
That just seems like it's unreasonable in this market.
Yeah.
They're gonna lock you behind another $80 game and say you can't get a legendary unless you get 2 versions. Like that just seems like it's
plus the DLC
and potentially Amiibo at like $50 a pop.
It's not gonna be Amiibo.
But I mean, seriously, like that just adds up so much, right? So yeah, well, I don't think there's going to be a Switch 2 Lite. I think they are thinking through the ways to make it up, to make it so that it is viable for more people to play it. Yeah, it's a big deal for them to get those.
Or we might see a Switch 2 Lite, but it's not the same kind of positioning as this, which is like
no mouse,
something much more affordable. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
that's a key feature of Switch 2 that they're pushing.
That's a good point. Just put it on the bottom of the things.
You're happy to buy this game, happy to get the bundle. You know, they didn't want the Mario Kart bundle because that's not a game that they play, but Pokemon is, and they're going to get this bundle. So I do think there is a contingent of people out there.
Well, again, everybody's saying the Switch 2 needs a system seller, yet the system is breaking records.
It's fine.
It's doing absolutely fine. So maybe this is the system that just sells itself. I don't know. It's a very strange phenomenon. Yeah, I think it's, if I remember correctly, Arceus did well, but it did not do as well as those mainline games.
No.
I think that's probably how this will be. And it's kind of hard to predict, like with the 2 generations. Like, all right, you got one that's popular, but it's got a smaller install base versus the Switch, which is bigger, but it's older. So how many of those are still in use? Very hard to forecast what that might. That's a tough assignment for the sales team.
I think so.
To try and forecast what that would be.
You're still very actively supporting the original Switch too, so you can't really like turn it off and just push everyone to get a Switch 2 to play, you know, this game. So it's kind of like, well, you take what you can get.
Yeah, so that's as close as
take it on whatever, but sell it on whatever system you can get.
Right, that's as close as I'll get to a prediction. Is it'll be big, not as big as a mainline game. It'll sell for years.
Yeah,
it'll sell for a long time.
Exactly, and I think the bundle will do well for them. I think the
bundle will be great.
But it does, like, again, it seems like they're doing.
I'll show other people using Wii remotes. Did they learn anything from the initial reveal? This commercial screams how Nintendo had no real vision for this console. This wasn't an ad that made you think or stuck with you or was clever in any way. You could replace the Wii U with any tech product here, and this commercial would be the exact same. And ending with the tagline, "How you will play next." I mean, it's fine, but that's a tagline anybody could come up with. Most Wii U ads just felt like an elaborate chart explaining everything the console can do. And some of them were just flat out charts. But that's whatever at this point. What truly matters is the system coming out. And on November 18th, 2012, the Wii U finally officially launched. The launch of the Wii U. This felt like something that would never come. We were waiting for so long. It was like asking, will Christ ever return? Nope. Opening up the Wii U basic set, we have an HDMI cord, sensor bar for Wii remotes, power brick for the console, power brick for the gamepad. You can't charge the controller via the console. It requires its own outlet. That is pathetic. I understand the gamepad requires more power than the Wii U was able to supply it, but that's Nintendo's problem to figure out. This just feels like something they realized 2 weeks before the system launched, like, oops, the gamepad needs its own AC adapter. Well, let's pull out the console itself. We get a white one with the basic set, and it's as boring as it isn't interesting. What, did they just think the Wii was successful? We'll just take a sander to it. The Wii U console design is incredibly functional. It looks good in any entertainment center, but it also doesn't stick out whatsoever. This system has no character to it. It isn't striking like the original Wii with its silver stand or quirky like the GameCube. It's just product. I mean, you can make your video game system a basic black box, that's fine, but just look at some of the most iconic and popular consoles of all time. Functionally, they could have all just been basic black boxes, but they aren't for a reason. It's good to have personality. It's good to stick out. The Wii U feels designed for somebody too self-conscious to admit they own a video game console. Oh, what's that? Oh, that's not a video game console. It's a box full of nickels and porn. Still, it's very functional. I mean, everything is pretty cut and dry here. The PlayStation 4 and 5, they look cooler, but the trade-off is I have no goddamn idea where the eject button is. First Nintendo home console without a reset button. Wow, that's a big deal. We have a flap on the front similar to the original Wii, though this one flicks into the system, which I always found pretty neat. SD card slot and 2 USB ports are nestled in here with the controller sync button on the outside now. Then on the back, 2 more USB ports plus all the connections you need, including the same AV port from the Wii, just in case. There's only 4 scenarios I can think of, and 3 involve bears. Man, what a boring-ass system. I don't blame Nintendo for always wanting to focus on the controller. I blame them for making this console boring as shit to begin with. That's about it for this bundle. No accessories included outside of the Wii U gamepad itself, which I guess you can consider this an accessory. The police do. This is the Wii U gamepad. Can you see it? This thing is crazy to hold in your hands for the first time. It almost feels unreal. It just looks kind of fake, especially the white one. The shininess of the plastic, the curves, and overall size of this thing reek of Fisher-Price. This is like baby's first iPad or a TV remote for seniors. This just looks and feels goofy. However, I am confident with going on the record that the Wii U gamepad is one of the most misunderstood controllers of all time. This is so comfortable. These grips and molds on the back make it surprisingly easy to pick up and immediately position your fingers where they belong. The button placement is nearly perfect here. Everything's in reach and feels natural. The buttons themselves all feel great. Nice and big, soft yet not mushy click to them. And the D-pad is the perfect gathering materials to be intriguing. But to be fair, I can convey those ideas through sock puppets and they're still cool ideas. They don't make for a good game. But hey, while most third-party games would come here missing DLC, Amazing Spider-Man has it all included on the disc. A movie tie-in from June of last year. The Wii U, it has the best version. It's also the plate to the best lasagna I've ever had. That very next month, we got Injustice Gods Among Us to absolutely no fanfare. It's like this game was a damn ghost. We barely knew anything about the Wii U version until it launched. No previews, early reviews, or gameplay really, which is strange considering it's fine. It's a competent version of the game. It launched alongside the others, and just missing a few elements like compatibility with the mobile companion game. A lot of DLC isn't there. Some modes aren't available. Same price. I appreciate them supporting the console, and this version plays well, but WB and Nintendo barely acknowledged its existence, and you charge full price when you're lacking a handful of features? Well, Injustice for Wii U did not meet our projections. Well, what the f were they? The big deal this month was the hard launch anticipating it to be. I mean, for one, we've already gotten a few virtual console games via the 30th anniversary campaign, and for 30 cents a pop, you launch Ice Climber for $5 and expect me to respond with compassion and empathy? Sure, if we bought them on Wii, we could download the Wii U versions at a discount, but that's the thing. These games were all already re-released on Wii. Ever since this thing launched, I could play these games and hundreds more on my Wii U through Wii mode. I just had to go through more menus and couldn't use the gamepad. Having to wait this long to play Donkey Kong Jr. when you could already play Donkey Kong Jr. on Wii U? I mean, what were we waiting for here? The Wii U to load. The added features were nice, soft TV play for the classics. That was a big bonus. But when they look like this, is it really? The NES games looked really lackluster with washed out and dark colors, the image wasn't crisp at all, and they also just didn't feel great to play. There's a bit of input lag, not enough to ruin games, but enough to make playing Virtual Console on Wii U feel sluggish, which wasn't something I ran into on Wii. Now, in contrast, Super Nintendo games looked beautiful, though still felt a bit off to play. Overall, nice to have classic games natively on Wii U, but I think this launch helped hit home why this wasn't going to be as exciting as previous Virtual Console efforts. Firstly, Nintendo was going to drip feed us the same exact games we bought on Wii and on 3DS, again on Wii U, throughout the rest of the generation. Wasn't like we hadn't had access to these games for years and we're finally getting them again. Secondly, they only launched with 2 consoles. We had like 5 right when the thing released. Thirdly, it was just disappointing to me, okay? I was excited at the prospect of playing these classic games on the gamepad, and when I finally got them, I realized there was nothing to really be excited about here. These were the same games I could play on Wii mode on my Wii U, but they were just less responsive now. It was nice to have these games on Virtual Console. I did buy a fair amount of them, but all things considered, this was a pretty lackluster element of the Wii U. But outside of my dozens of problems, it was great! Donkey Kong 3? Ooh! But hey, while all these titles we've had more than enough access to for years, Nintendo decided to announce during an April Nintendo Direct that they were finally going to re-release Earthbound on Wii U Virtual Console. This was big. I mean, this was a game that was so hard to nab a cartridge of. It was a game that never got re-released outside of Japan, and for it to finally get anything was pretty awesome. In addition, the Wii received a software update, upgrading it from slow as f to slow as shit. And overall, I'd say it was a pretty relaxed spring for the Wii U. And not barren, but not too awful much going on. This news hit me like a truck, and a big one at that. While Nintendo was going to E3 2013, they were not going to have a traditional live, on-stage press conference, instead opting for the Nintendo Direct format they've been toying around with as of late. Listen, nowadays, that's no problem. The norm for most companies, actually. But have you ever watched the Nintendo Direct from 2013? Wario. I still love them, but to replace the press conference with it, that felt too far. We got so many electrifying moments at E3 by hearing the crowd's reaction, seeing these people go up on stage and proudly proclaiming digital presentations. A lot of people view Nintendo's approach here as cowardly, with some misinterpreting it as them skipping E3 as a whole. It was seen that if Nintendo refused to go on stage, they weren't confident. They were scared about being compared to Sony and Microsoft. When in reality, I mean, we know how much better digital presentations can be now. You have a much better flowing event with none of the technical problems or fluff like dance numbers and a car. What you lose in excitement and flashiness, you make up for with a better overall experience for the majority of the event's viewers, and I think Nintendo realized that before many other companies. They just decided to assert their stance at a very odd time. The E3 you're gonna show Smash Brothers at, and we're not gonna be able to hear the crowd's reaction, I think that was the biggest disappointment for me. Plus, the direct format wasn't refined enough at this point, and we didn't expect as much from them as we do today. These felt like investors' meetings for fans, and the idea of this replacing our E3, frankly, was a bit concerning, for more reasons than one. Yeah, right after this, Nintendo started to copyright claim videos on YouTube featuring gameplay of the titles, which made it less likely people were gonna make and share videos about Wii U games online. I swear, with these two decisions back to back in addition to all the previous marketing snafus, I felt like they were actively trying to do the wrong thing. Wailing. We got a few more releases in May, like Resident Evil Revelations, the HD console port of the 3DS game from 2012, Lego Batman 2, a year-old game lacking the DLC from 360 and PS3, Sniper Elite V2, a year-old game that's missing multiplayer in general, my god, and Fast and Furious Showdown. It's on me. Stuff to play, but like, I don't want just stuff. I want uncompromised experiences. That's something that doesn't feel like table scraps or a sympathy port. Well, for that, Nintendo held yet another Nintendo Direct this month. Now, 2013, they stuck to a roughly monthly schedule with these presentations, which was really cool, but they frankly didn't have enough content to warrant a Nintendo Direct every month. I mean, they wouldn't shut the hell up about Game & Wario in half of these. Like, does this really warrant this much coverage? With that in mind, this was sort of a calm before the storm Direct. They get some info out prior to E3, but some of that info was pretty massive. Turns out, Nintendo struck a deal. Sega will create 3 Sonic the Hedgehog games exclusively for Wii U. How do you win at that? What, do you move your hips more? Do you have to do more exaggerated motion? What do you do? And then in addition, like, yeah, there's, like 28 games in this whole entire collection, and each of them are incredibly shallow. Like, you're only gonna play them like once or twice with a specific group of people. I will maintain, 1-2 Switch is pretty fun that first time you play it.
25, I feel like they normally go for around 30 after fees, so if we can get them for 20 a piece, that could be an extra, $20 in the budget. Shoot, 21 after fees is what we're looking at, and a nice pixelated listing photo too, but look at what else they have over here. Big old Switch section. A good amount of it is sealed, so I'm not as interested in that. We definitely could buy Cooking Mama at only 23. Burnout. Run that I used to have. So folks, I don't think we're gonna have any issues at this convention finding just a plethora of games that we don't have in the collection yet. The problem may be more, I think I need to start looking for some loose GBA games. That's gonna be my next mission, because those, especially like the common sort of main series Mario and stuff, tend to do really well for me on Amazon. So let's go try to build our budget that way. Fire Emblem, 65. Final Fantasy I know I've done okay with before. That one I think I may be interested in. All right, so we got $25 price on that. Okay, 27 after fees. You wouldn't be able to do 20 on this guy, would you? Awesome, thank you so much, I appreciate that. I like this. Straight from Half Price Books onto the booth. That's the hustle right there, folks. That's what you got to do. I like money. Uh-oh, Spanky. It's your favorite. SSX Tricky. Sexy Tricky. Actually, I'm curious what that's going for right now. Yeah, it looks like there's not much margin on that one either. Just get it anyway, for the memories. Okay, so we're looking at... It's priced at 65. We're looking at 70 after fees. Do you think you have this at 65? Would you go 55? Okay, sweet. You're making it easy on me. So 55 plus 20 puts us at 75, I appreciate it. You got it, okay. So folks, a $7 and a $15 profit on these games puts us at a total of a $50 Switch game budget for the day, which is at least one really solid Switch game, maybe 2 middle ones, or 1/3 of Celeste if we decide to go that way, which honestly, I'm leaning more towards the rare games today. They're harder to find at just your standard pawn shops and video game stores, so we may go for like a single or maybe 2 high-dollar grails. I was just wondering, do you know if the save battery is good on this? Okay.
It was 3 years ago.
Okay, gotcha. For these 3, do y'all have any wiggle room if I got all 3?
Not this early in the day.
Sure. Okay, well I think I'll go ahead and do these anyway, and I'll probably be back a little bit later as well. Thank you. So folks, what I said about GBA games goes for original Game Boy games as well. We picked up 2 copies of Tetris, which I know I can get $15 a piece for after fees. I sell these all the time. And also a really nice Super Mario Land, which I can get, I think, around 22 to 25 for, which puts us at a total budget of $73. So we're slowly inching up to that Celeste. I'm stoked about it. So folks, one thing that I always look for at these conventions is the less organized the booth, the more likely you're going to be to get a good deal. And this one looks kind of like a yard sale, so I'm really feeling it. So we got a good number of Game Boy stuff in here, it looks like, which is good to see. Ooh, I can't remember the price of that off the top of my head. These prices, for the most part, are seeming fairly close to market. That's one that I want to look up. Got a lot of Game Gear in here, which really doesn't sell well on Amazon at all. Ooh, we got a expansion pack. Ooh, a pink Kirby game. Nice. It's not one that I see very much, but it does hold a really good amount of value, as you can see. You guys know if you've watched for a while that I love buying handhelds. They do super well on Amazon. Well, it seems like it's in good working shape. Let me see if... Okay, yeah, I do hear the volume on that. You had $245. What do you think you could do if I were to just buy it now?
Cash or credit?
I could do cash.
Give me $230 cash.
$230? All right, I think I'd do that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Are these guys all priced as well? Interesting. It's kind of a fun replacement art. I'll tell you what, to make it an even $250, would you do 20 on this bad boy?
Well, to not have fun looking at this thing, let alone playing it. And with how many people I hear constantly talk about their nostalgia linked to the GameCube, I was shocked to find out I was hearing voices in my head. Yeah, the GameCube sold pretty poorly, not only in comparison to the competition at the time, but previous Nintendo systems. See, as a kid, I never realized this. I was too busy stick flicking. I always knew the PlayStation 2 was more popular, but it wasn't until I logged onto the internet one fateful day I discovered just how many people said geometry can kiss my ass. The GameCube was where I became a Nintendo fanboy, i.e., a fucking idiot. I was willing to defend this console to death. It could have been convicted of manslaughter, and I would say, yeah, well, the third-party support was better than you think. I would go to my friend's house who had a PlayStation 2, look at the controller, and scoff. Yeah, you may have every game known to man released on this thing, DVD playback, music CD support, backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 1, more robust online multiplayer, but I can bring mine to lunch. I mean, looking back, I can clearly see a lot of the GameCube's downsides and how they might have contributed to such low sales. It doesn't mean I love it any less, it just means I might not make my emergency contact. Might. But it's hard to ignore how it feels like everybody's had a GameCube experience in their lives. There's death, taxes, and Luigi's Mansion. So let's discuss the Nintendo GameCube. Nintendo's first foray into the GameCube market. Nintendo dominated the video game industry with their initial home consoles, the Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo Entertainment System, yet started to struggle with their third, the Nintendo 64. While a modest success, not only were sales going down with each new Nintendo console, they were no longer top dog. With a controller like this, anything was possible, even failure. Sony's PlayStation sold over 100 million units, over 3 times as much as what the 64 sold. Why did Nintendo struggle so much this generation? I don't know. Well, the PlayStation used CDs for games. That allowed for far more data to be so much more pathetic. You just want to wipe your nose whenever you use this. So while there were some outstanding titles on the platform, Nintendo just couldn't compete with Sony. Only a little over 300 games were made for the 64 compared to the PlayStation's point made. Onto the drawing board for Nintendo. Their successor to the Nintendo 64 was poised to be the successor to the Nintendo 64. Yeah, there wasn't necessarily a massive directional change Nintendo was making with this project. It was just meant to be a more powerful new video game machine. Codenamed Project Dolphin. Oh, badass! Development started in 1998 with the first public announcement of the name being just prior to E3 1999. Though nothing else of worth was really talked about outside of the graphics. You'll like them. DVD support was teased, though in reality it was still up in the air. This system was a ways off, and it felt like Nintendo announced it because the Nintendo 64 just was not working out, and everybody else was showing off their new consoles. How Sega already released theirs. With Sony debuting the PlayStation 2 and Microsoft talking about stepping into the ring with their own system, Nintendo pulled a me at a high school reunion. Yeah, I got some projects in the works. You work at Big Boy. Nintendo waited a year and a half until August of 2000 at their Space World Expo in Japan to fully reveal not only their new handheld, the Game Boy Advance, but their next generation home console as well, titled GameCube. With a name like that, you can't be disappointed. The way they revealed it here made GameCube feel like a fashion statement with great specs. So many funky colors, and after complaints as to what the hell the N64 was, Nintendo went, alright, shapes are in. This was where many GameCube games debuted, albeit in the form of tech demos, or at least that's how they were presented. The first game officially shown for the GameCube was Meowth's Party. Bizarre first words. Early versions of Wave Race, Blue Storm, Luigi's Mansion, Star Wars Rogue Leader, and Metroid Prime were shown, though Nintendo claimed that none of these represented games in active development, and they were all just tech demos, which they say during every console reveal. Which this was also the case for the infamous clip of a Zelda GameCube title showcase at the event as well. Link and Ganondorf fighting it off with a graphical quality fans could only dream of. GameCube was said to be fairly powerful, more so than the PlayStation 2 and Sega Dreamcast, and Nintendo was planning a launch in July of 2001 in Japan and October of 2001 in North America. Big things were in the works for not only this system, but the Game Boy Advance as well. And the Nintendo 64 experienced numerous software drives, which obviously was something Nintendo was trying to avoid this time around. They always do. So, they just gave up on the 64 as early as May 2001, releasing their last game half a year before GameCube launched, and most games in development for the 64 were moved right on over to the GameCube. Nintendo was putting their all into this generation. Honestly, I mean, the Game Boy Advance had so many games, more quality support than the Game Boy Color and original Game Boy ever had. And adding their next-gen high-tech system to the mix, also with a healthy amount of titles, you'd think they would have dominated this generation. You'd think. Nintendo was a stubborn child that doesn't actually understand why they fail in the first place sometimes. Dude, the bullet wounds help me run faster. Yes, Project Dolphin was revealed to use discs, and it seemed that Nintendo was finally responding to everybody saying they needed to move to CDs or DVDs. This wasn't what we meant. GameCube games came on discs, yes, but they were mini DVD type discs, so they were cheaper to produce than traditional Nintendo 64 cartridges, and they could store a lot more on them. They were still pathetic. The already released PlayStation 2 and upcoming Xbox used regular-sized DVDs for the games, which allowed developers to store considerably more data on them, and with game files doing nothing but increasing in size every generation, it was pretty stupid that the GameCube discs were far closer to PlayStation 1 than the PlayStation 2 in terms of capacity. Even though the GameCube was more powerful, some PS2 games just wouldn't work on the thing. They were too big. You'd have to do so much work to get some of these titles to fit on GameCube because of the tiny discs. When Tiger Woods' PGA Tour on GameCube had to release on 2 of them, that's when I, as a GameCube fan, noticed something was up. Boy, these 1.5 gigabyte discs sure are limiting. On top of the storage limitations, these discs may have looked like mini DVDs, but they were Nintendo's own creation, meaning the GameCube was just that, a cube for game. The PlayStation 2 did as well as it did, partly because of the fact it could play DVD movies. That way, you just had to buy one product instead of a game console and DVD player separately. The Xbox could also play DVDs. Hell, the Dreamcast at the very least could play music CDs. The GameCube couldn't do anything like that. So yes, while the move to discs was good, it felt like Nintendo still wanted to put their own stupid spin on it. Like, fine, we'll do discs, but you're not gonna like it. They were so concerned over piracy, and the GameCube discs were trickier to copy. Plus, not having to cram DVD playing technology into this thing aided in giving the system a pretty low price point. Nintendo announced a starting price of $199.99, which was $100 less than the competition. Was it worth it? Nintendo was the cheap bitch this generation. That concept was announced at E3 2001 alongside the launch plans for the console. Games that were initially revealed as tech demos were shown as full-fledged games, with the Space World demo of Luigi running around with ghosts turning out to be Luigi's Mansion. Yeah, no defining Mario platformer launch title like the previous systems. Here's a smelly f***ing brother instead. Of course, the big reveal was Super Smash Bros. Melee alongside a brand new IP from Nintendo, Pikmin. They alluded to this being their next Pokemon, I think because it shared a lot of the same letters. Connectivity between GameCube and Game Boy Advance was advertised heavily during the pre-launch build-up. I feel like Nintendo was expecting this to be utilized a ton. They also discussed a wireless controller for the system, the Wavebird, and after a few delays, the system launched on September 14th, 2001 in Japan, November 18th, 2001 in North America, and May 3rd, 2002 in Europe. Sales were pretty good, until they weren't. That's generally the case with Nintendo consoles. They sell really well at launch, but if that continues throughout its life, it depends. The GameCube appealed to Nintendo fans. They were the ones who bought it up at launch. If you weren't a diehard Nintendo fan, you'd still find something to like about the console, no doubt, though there were obviously better PlayStation 2-like options available to you. With that being said, the launch of the GameCube was only 3 days after the original Xbox, 389 days after the PlayStation 2, and a little over 10,000 days after Watergate. What did Nintendo have to show for it? Oh, it's purple. The GameCube launched in 2 colors, jet black and indigo. For some reason, this was Nintendo's go-to color in North America, especially during this generation with the Game Boy Advance sporting it as well. This felt like Nintendo trying to appeal to both hardcore children and hardcore man children. Like, the black one fits right next to any printer. The purple one is too much fun. Like, I want to do stocks, damn it. Well, the design is much more grounded than the Nintendo 64. It definitely feels like its successor, especially with the 4 controller ports on the front. I think Nintendo struck a wonderful balance between standard-looking game console and silly f***ing system. This generation, Nintendo didn't necessarily try to do their own thing like they did with the Wii, Wii U, Nintendo Switch, those eras. Who cares what Sony's doing? Let's make Brain Age. GameCube, Nintendo was actively directly competing with Sony and Microsoft. However, they obviously didn't want to rid the GameCube of any Nintendo charm. It was so much smaller than other game consoles at the time. I mean, you could fit it in a car, help 2 of them. But the biggest Nintendo-esque innovation was being able to hold the damn thing. Video game consoles have always had this issue, and Nintendo fixed it by installing a handle for maximum looking like a lunchbox. They wanted people to lug their GameCube around and bring it to friends' houses, sometimes even going as far as considering the GameCube to be pseudo-portable. And yeah, this was one of the most comfortable home consoles to travel with, but keep in mind, you also need a controller, an AC adapter, and AV cables and games, so the portability of the GameCube with the handle kind of becomes a moot point when you have to wear cargo shorts to carry the rest. I think this was more of a design choice to give the GameCube more character rather than being about functionality. Without the handle, it's literally just a game-cube. With it, it's a GameCube. I mean, I think it's important to have an instantly recognizable design for your system. If you just try to identify systems via their silhouettes, even if you think the PlayStation 5 looks disgusting, it's a better reaction than trying to figure out which one of these rectangles is the Xbox One. That's diet right. The handle helped characterize the GameCube. It's quirky and functional, which is a sentiment that carries over to the controller. The GameCube controller. One of my go-to quotes. I love this thing. It's obvious Nintendo learned from the Nintendo 64 and other controllers out on the market. It's unbelievable how well this fits in your hands. Everything just oozes in the right position. It's like human hands were made for this. So much better than anything else on the market at the time. The PlayStation controllers, they're good, but they feel a bit too rigid. Like they were made to look good rather than feel good. Xbox controllers, it just looks like it would be uncomfortable to be this. Dreamcast, you're lucky you have good games. This, I mean, it's pretty stupid looking, but it just makes so much sense. This button layout is ingenious. You have one big button that's supposed to be for your primary action in the game. Then you have everything around it, and every button has a distinct shape, which makes it so much easier to just focus on the game without looking down at the controller. If you ever play GameCube with somebody and they ask you where the B button is, you're kidding, right? Analog triggers, they're pressure sensitive, meaning in certain games you can give a shit or kind of give a shit. And they click when you push them as hard as possible, which is so smart. Other controllers, I find myself nearly breaking my fingers because I'm pushing harder and harder, even though that's as far as it'll go. The Z button? Sure, this one was always peculiar to me. I mean, it works fine, it's a shoulder button. It's the only one. The D-pad's a little too small and the C-stick is as well. I mean, it's comfortable enough and works awesome for camera control as a secondary stick. However, we were starting to creep into first-person shooter territory this generation. Games that need both these sticks working as equals, and for that, it works perfectly fine. It's just a little funky. The GameCube controller has a few quirks where some games may not work well with it. The button placement doesn't line up at all with the Super Nintendo, so if you ever play an old-school game with it, arthritis can be considered a feature. Just one Z button on the top is strange. There's also no select button, just one for start/pause, which is interesting they did note on the controller that this is a pause button. The D-pad and C-stick are a bit too tiny. It is not a perfect controller by a long shot, but it'll forever be one of my all-time favorites. It feels so good in the hands, and when you play a game that works well with it, why does heroin exist? Just play the damn GameCube. However, while the controller feels great, it did lack innovation. There wasn't much this controller was doing that others didn't. That's where the accessories come into play. As you can get the Wavebird wireless controller separately. Cut the cord. The Wavebird was a revolution for controllers, launching 1 year after the GameCube's initial release. It wasn't the first wireless controller, it was the first good wireless controller. Wireless controllers used to primarily use infrared technology, much like a TV remote, meaning you had to keep them pointing at the transmission signal. The Wavebird used radio waves, which allowed you to point the thing wherever you want. They don't give a shit. Just plug the adapter in, match up the numbers via the dials, which Nintendo. I was wondering if you could make these smaller. Pop 2 AA's in, and for up to 20 feet away, you're good to go. The battery life is incredible on the Wavebird, though since you have to turn the controller itself off, it can be easier to forget to turn it off. And because of the need for batteries, Nintendo left out the rumble feature of the wired controller, which was built in now, but this wasn't available at launch. So what was available at launch? Just enough. The GameCube launched with 12 games here in the States. Yikes! Definitely wasn't the craziest launch, as a third of the games were sports titles nobody remembers. Oh god, what was the Madden that released that year? There were some standouts. Disney's Tarzan Untamed, which, hey, IGN thought it was 0.1 point better than the PS2 version. Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader was a big deal. If you wanted a graphical showcase, this was the game to get. It still looks impressively close to the movies, and was just a straight-up great game to boot. Nintendo had a thing going with LucasArts at the time, really pushing Star Wars titles on their hardware. I mean, a Stormtrooper was one of the Nintendo characters represented on the Nintendo 64 console box. I would say more about this game, but I've never seen a Star Wars movie. Every day it becomes that much more too late to start. Sega was notably one of the bigger names on the GameCube at launch, just months after wrapping up things with the Dreamcast. What once was Nintendo's biggest rival became one of their biggest supporters, starting with Super Monkey Ball, the first Sega game on a Nintendo home console. This was a big deal, and for some, it was revolting. Not in my house. But for many Nintendo fans, they finally got to experience Sega games on their turf. And as it turned out, Super Monkey Ball became one of the most beloved GameCube titles. Originally an arcade game titled Monkey Ball released earlier that year, Super Monkey Ball is an enhanced port, i.e. they added Gon. The premise couldn't be simpler. Monkey, ball, you just roll the ball to the goal. You control the environment, not the monkey. Don't explain this while sweaty. Seriously, one of the simplest ideas ever for a game. But it doesn't matter because that ended up making it unbelievably accessible and understandable. The game is brutally difficult at times, but never unfair and too daunting for casual players. There's no buttons involved, just move the stick. And if that's too simple, well, play the party games, you f***ing creep. The main game is very grounded in its arcade roots. It's mostly about version. Most people who bought the GameCube bought it for the Nintendo first-party exclusives, and the rest were parents who bought it for their kids. So oftentimes, GameCube got at least an entry or two from the series, but then eventually they would just skip it with the following games. But it just straight up never got Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, San Andreas, Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, Devil May Cry 1 through 3, Final Fantasy 10, 11, 12, Silent Hill 2 through 4, Burnout 3, Revenge, basically none of the multi-platform Dance Dance Revolution games, and so many other titles that could have run on it. The GameCube was more than capable, but it just had discs that were too small and an audience that skewed too young and too unique. It definitely helped when third-party games were a bit more Nintendo-esque in design, which is why Sonic had a huge presence here. Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 were ported over from the Dreamcast, and the GameCube was the only console to get these versions at the time, and that really helped these games out. Most people would agree Sonic Adventure DX isn't as good as the Dreamcast original, but it's still Sonic Adventure, caused many a kid to be diagnosed with becoming a Sonic fan. And yes, it is fatal. Sega made sure Nintendo fans converted, offering both Sonic Mega Collection and Gems Collection, featuring most of the classic Sonic games from the Sega Genesis and other consoles. And if that wasn't enough, the first original from the ground up Sonic console-free, non-Sega home console, Sonic Heroes. This one was multi-platform, but the GameCube version is often considered the best, as Sega knew this was where it would do the best. Sonic fans are mostly on GameCube. Then there was Shadow the Hedgehog. They did Sonic Riders. I still have no goddamn idea how to play this game. There's a lot of, I don't know what it is, but there was a lot of it. I only own Sonic Mega Collection, but I still have a lot of nostalgia for Adventure and Adventure 2 Battle just from seeing clips of them within Mega Collection. There's this whole history of Sonic video. Man, I knew there was just so much Sonic on GameCube that I just didn't have access. The greatest Nintendo system of all time, or video game system of all time, if you want to be broader.
Well, we've never discussed this ever. Definitely not 5 minutes before we went live here, but it's absolutely the GameCube.
It is the best. Now, I don't know how much of this is like truly nostalgia. Do you really think it's really nostalgia how much the GameCube is like so cool and so like good in terms of the library, just everything about it, the controller, the design, just how the games looked, how the games sounded, all of it. It just feels it's just my favorite Nintendo system. But I'm kind of like figuring out like, do you think it's nostalgia or do you think it's actually like really that good if it's really that up there?
I think there is. I mean, there's nostalgia definitely because if you compare it to games now, visually speaking, it's nowhere near them. But I think there was just this charm about Nintendo at that time in the early 2000s with their first party games, even some of the third party stuff that just felt very much Nintendo. I guess it's the only way you can describe it. So you still have games that there's nothing like them still to this day. So it's an easy generation for me anyway to go back to because it's not like the chunky 3D visuals that we had when we were first moving to 3D with the N64 and the PS1. So they're tolerable. And the GameCube puts out some pretty good visuals through an HDMI adapter with that digital port on the back to where it's still good enough. But I will say, if you can get a CRT TV, I know you hear this from people a lot, like get a CRT. The GameCube at that time actually it comes through pretty good on one of those still.
I think it holds up the best. I mean, like next to the Xbox, like whenever I play the PS2 these days, like it's rough. That thing does not output necessarily very well.
Yep.
Even through 30-old composite or something, it still looks pretty okay for composite. This game system still looks pretty good today. 3D models and all that, obviously outdated. It doesn't hold up in every way, but I think from like an aesthetic point of view, from an art design point of view, most of the games I think still look quite good. You look at something like Mario Sunshine, even like Wind Waker, specifically Wind Waker is like the best looking game from that generation, I'd say today.
That art style though helps a lot with that because at that time the PS2 and the Xbox they were trying to cater to a more mature audience, and because of that they tried to go more realistic at a time when we weren't quite there yet. We got much closer with the 360 and the PS3, and I think we're basically there now, where you can have games that are as close to cinema in the movie theater experiences as we are at all. So at that time I think Nintendo did a good job going with those art styles that lent more into like the cartoony style 80% 90% of the time, but something like Wind Waker still looks great now. You can fire it up and you're like, oh wow, this works. All right.
Yeah, I think there's very little that really needed to be updated. It's wild to think like that was the game that they initially were like, hey, let's do an HD remaster of this back on Wii U, because like out of all the Zelda titles, it probably needed it the least, but it looked the best when it brought into HD without very little like effort put into it. And they still put a lot of effort into that HD remaster. But like when you look back at the original GameCube one, it's easy to forget how good that original game still looked. And Wind Waker may be an outlier just because of the art style, but games like Mario Sunshine, Metroid Prime, I think games back then they just understood 3D visuals and they understood how to get the most out of like art design and all of that, to the point where these games are still in 4x3. They may be a little blocky in various cases and have lower end textures, but like they still look like they're never unplayable. They always look like they have their own style, and I think the GameCube just holds up tremendously well today. But back in the day, how was the GameCube as a player back then? Because I had the GameCube as a very young kid. That was like my first game console. So while I understood a lot of its shortcomings back then, I didn't really understand like a lot of the really massive ones. I understood it couldn't play DVDs, but I kind of looked at it like, what are you saying? The third-party support is bad. Like it's just like I'm getting all these games, and they were all like whatever the licensed kids games, pretty much, because that's what I was playing back then. But as somebody who was a bit older back then, how do you how do you remember it back in the day as a video game player?
It was definitely not seen as mature as the PS2 or the Xbox, and it did miss, when you mentioned the third-party stuff, it missed some fairly large games like Grand Theft Auto wasn't there. That was probably the biggest one where you're like, oh, well, the PlayStation has it, and the Xbox eventually got it, the GameCube doesn't have it. Oh, well, there's a reason for that in their mind, is because the GameCube isn't really catering to the same audience. But I actually thought one of the bigger titles that they missed out on was Final Fantasy X, because that came out relatively earlier in the PS2's life, and there are a few games I think back on that really made you feel like you were going into the next generation, and that was probably the one. Like when you got Final Fantasy X and you fired it up and it hit you with that initial cutscene with Tidus and Battle Blitzball, and then it transitioned, not seamlessly, but close enough to where you're like, okay, these in-game models still look really good. That was kind of the moment to me to kick things off. But the GameCube was seen as the younger system, and that was the system I first had back then. I didn't own a PS2, my cousin did, and I played at their place, and we went over there quite a bit. But the GameCube was my first, like, this is my system from this generation, and all my friends had PS2 and Xbox, and I was the GameCube kid. But even then, as like 12 or 13, it wasn't necessarily a system you had a lot of people to talk to about it, because I think I was the only one of my group of friends that had it at first, and then one of my other friends got it. So I would sit there and talk about some of these games, like Mario Sunshine, but the only one that really, I think, got people's interest was probably Metroid Prime, because that was the other game that I was thinking of that made me feel like the GameCube, you could just walk up to people and say, have you seen this game? This game looks incredible. It's Metroid Prime, and it legitimately looked better than, I think, anything, even Halo, the original Halo. Metroid Prime had some moments, especially with weather and environments and them playing around with the visor that would fog up or freeze a little bit, and it was so fluid that was the game that I think put the GameCube a bit over some of those systems at that time in terms of visuals. But it was certainly not a system you ran around talking to everyone about. It wasn't until later, and really 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago, when all of a sudden the GameCube started to spike in popularity, and I think that's just because we all got older and we're now looking back on getting our childhood systems.
Well, you can't play a lot of these games anywhere else still. Most of these games like that you really do remember from the GameCube and are these system-defining titles are still only available on GameCube. A lot of the Nintendo stuff, but a lot of the third-party stuff as well, and even multi-platform stuff still, like the GameCube, I don't know, I'd say like on GameCube, a lot of those games, even if, like, let's say the Xbox or PS2 version has exclusive features, or, you know, the Xbox version probably would run better, I just feel like the GameCube is still, like, the most accessible to just plug in, play right away, no issue, just immediately. The controller, I love it. You know, yeah, I just always preferred playing a lot of those games on that system. But there wasn't a ton of those games. It always felt like a lot of series would try like 1 or 2 entries on GameCube and then kind of give up, or they try like a random one in the middle, like the Burnout games. You know, you got 1, 2, and then after that, none of them. After the Burnout series actually got really good and really popular, that's when they were like, oh yeah, no Burnout 3, and nothing after that. We only got an exclusive Metal Gear Solid. It was a remake, but still, you know, yeah, but yeah, no Metal Gear Solid 2, no Metal Gear Solid 3. Do you know of any like reason why they went for like a remake of the first game rather than like 2 or 3? Was it because of hardware limitations, because of, like, the disc size, or because Nintendo commissioned or like went to Konami about this?
I don't think it was any real technical limitations. I think because it was Silicon Knights did it. Yeah. So apparently they had one of the people who director of that studio had a relationship, I believe, with Kojima, and they got together and they were trying to come up with ways to make that work, and they decided to make this on the GameCube. But that was always a weird one to me with that situation, because 2 was huge when that came out. It was this massive deal. It actually go to the Xbox, you know, which was good to see that as well. But it was kind of strange. I think the problem they ran into with Metal Gear Solid 3 is that the GameCube just wasn't selling like the PS2, and to the point where they weren't sure if it was worth even doing it. So they just went with one system with the PS2 at the time and just developed for that. Because like even I remember when Resident Evil 4 got announced, and that was legitimately surprising to people, because they're like, oh, the GameCube's getting Resident Evil 4. How is that happening? And we know it's because Nintendo and Capcom came up with a deal for a bunch of games, and that was one of them. But because it's this hard M-rated Resident Evil game that's exclusive to the system with a handle, you know, this cube, it was a really weird thing to people at that time. So I think there was. I think Nintendo was harder to work with back then. I will say that there's a lot of history behind them not even sending out dev kits until after the system was out. Those kind of things that I think really hurt relations with developers. And it's pretty well documented. There's even more recent articles, as I think it's like 2 or 3 years ago, detailing some of these shortcomings for Nintendo with developer relations then, which have got a lot better now. I will say that, but it was a tough time for developers then with the GameCube and just trying to make something work with it.
Yeah, well, the GameCube had a lot of shortcomings in the form of barely any online multiplayer. It had it. Yeah. You could do it on there, but you could buy the broadband adapter, and it pretty much only worked with Phantasy Star Online, and that was pretty much it outside of LAN play for games like Mario Kart and Kirby Air Ride. But outside of that, like, it just wasn't used, which kind of makes you wonder, like, why did Sega put Phantasy Star Online on the GameCube? I think the reasoning was that they said, like, oh, well, it's structurally very similar to the Dreamcast, but it's just like there's barely any online multiplayer.
Thank you for coming. Pleasure's all mine.
So this is Iwata Asks New Super Mario Bros. U, and I'd like to talk about this new Super Mario Bros. Game, which was just officially announced for Wii U.
Okay.
First, the name changed from last year, didn't it?
That's right. You see, before making this game, we gained a lot of support for the multiplayer feature thanks to the previous title, New Super Mario Bros. Wii.
So this long-standing challenge of having a 4-player Mario experience on one screen, which you've worked on for roughly 20 years, you were at long last able to meet on Wii.
At long last. And this time, we were thinking of ways to improve the multiplayer experience, and we adopted as, one theme, something Miyamoto-san asked, which was, can't you have more characters? And, more than just adding characters, as this is a Nintendo game, we discussed using Mii characters. We talked about things like, how would it be adding Mii characters to a Mario experience?
That's because until now, Mii characters have not lived in the Mario universe.
That's right. But let's say it's your Mii appearing on the screen, and you're playing with your mom, dad, your grandpa, grandma, or whoever.
Yes, I see. 4 players is great, but it can be hard to tell who's who. Well, it's easier to tell who's Mario, but as you go along, it becomes more difficult. And you have people saying, who am I again? And who just got in my way? Now it's much easier to keep track of that.
Later on, as we continued working on the game, the name of the console was finalized as Wii U, and when we were thinking of what to call this first title,
it's a launch title.
We felt it would be fitting to add the word U to this Mario, so we asked to change the name of the game.
I see. So you're offering New Super Mario Bros. U as something you want people to enjoy when it launches with the console.
Yes, that's right.
So the multiplayer feature, which people enjoyed in Mario games now, includes Mii characters. It's something I think people were able to see coming. How about things people won't be expecting? Things they wouldn't know from last year's showing?
Well, with Wii U, we have the Wii U gamepad.
The controller with the screen.
Right, and the screen isn't simply another monitor, but rather something you use to create a fresh experience and something to have fun with. We thought, we should use this with the next Mario. That is to say, we wanted to use it. What comes to mind first is to use it for competitive play. In New Super Mario Bros., we originally thought of the multiplayer feature as being competitive play. This time, however, it's more in the vein of assist play.
It's not competitive versus play.
Right, we thought we could use the new controller screen as a way to, help players.
How do you help players?
Mario games are kind of like obstacle courses. You jump around and fall in holes, things like that.
So you can make a platform when the other player wants one, or when someone's about to fall, you make a platform to save them.
Right. Also, enemies and other things on screen will react when you tap them, too.
What do you mean by react?
Well, like enemies momentarily freezing.
Oh, so you help by blocking enemies.
It's a very simple thing, but as you play those things, really stand out and feel fun. And, before you know it, people are, yelling and having just a great time.
So this gameplay allows one person to help another, but does it allow you to help up to 4 other players, too?
Yes, that's right, it does.
So now it's 5 players.
Up to 5 people can play.
By the way, it seems like we've been making a new Super Mario Bros. Game title about every 3 years. But let me dare to ask, don't we ever run out of ideas?
We haven't changed the core essential part of the game.
The parts that doesn't change really do not change, do they? All you do is move left to right and get the flag. Similar things appear every time. Mario beats Bowser, and Princess Peach gets kidnapped. Every time.
Yeah, even as we're working on the game, we say to ourselves, are we sure this is the way to go? Even so, we don't change it. We can't change it. It's because we know the controls, it seems like they've never changed, but they have changed.
Well, the way Mario glides and jumps each time is actually quite different.
Well, they are different. So what actions Mario takes that make you afraid, or how it's scary if you run into an enemy. So we develop the game so emotions like that are what you experience most clearly.
Today, I asked you about New Super Mario Bros. U, which will go on sale at the same time as the Wii U hardware. To wrap up, would you, as the developer of the game, please say a few words to our viewers?
Well, Mario games, particularly 2D side-scrolling Mario games, have changed little by little over the years. And
なってきまして、開発も。
そうですね。
本当に大詰めで、先日はテストで私も参戦して、
はい、
ビリを走ったりしながらですね
そうですね。三浦さんにはご協力をいただいています。
体験させてもらったんですけど、今日はある意味そのネットワークに関わるマリオカート7は何が新しいか、何が変わったかっていう話をお聞きしようと思います。
はい、よろしくお願いします。
はい、まずそうですね、3DS といえばすれ違い通信じゃないですか。
そうですね。
ですれ違い通信でマリオカート7は何ができるのかから教えてください。
任天堂 3DS ではすれ違い通信を今度システムでやることで、いつ何時でもすれ違いができるようにしたんですけれども、今回マリオカートではいろんな機能があるんですけれども、タイムアタックでやり込んで自分のゴーストを作って、そのゴーストと一緒に戦うで、タイムアタックをしてどんどん更新するっていうゴースト機能をまずすれ違いのデータに載せて、いろんな人にまず配るっていうんですかね、交換する、そういうところでのすれ違いですから、本当に例えば学校であるとか、あと会社の職場であるとか、意外とその仲間内とか本当に身近な友達のデータが来ることもあって、インターネットでダウンロードするのともまたちょっと違った楽しみ方もあるんじゃないかなと思っていますね。
インターネットだとどこかで誰かの自分とは物理的に接触のない人とのやり取りになることが多いんですけれど、すれ違い通信の場合はある時に時間と場所を共有したっていうことがあるわけですから、ですから学校が同じかもしれない、職場が同じかもしれないけど、実は学校も職場も違うし、ひょっとしたら口も聞いたこともないんだけれども、毎日同じバスや電車に乗り合わせるという人かもしれないんですよね。
そうなんです。で今回マリオカートチャンネルというものがあるんですけど、本体にマリオカートチャンネルをインストールすることで、いろんなその情報がそこに集まってくるというのをやったんですけれども、今回も同じようにそのマリオカート7の中のマリオカートチャンネルにすれ違いデータや、例えばいつの間に通信で来た情報がどんどん集まってくるようにしたんですね。
基本的にすれ違いで交換するのはゴーストデータと思っておけばいいんですか？
そうですね。ゴーストデータや、あとは対戦履歴っていうんですかね、例えばインターネット対戦をした時のレーティングっていうそのスコアみたいなものがあるんですけども、そのスコアもそうですし、あとはその人が何人ぐらいすでにすれ違ったのかっていうその人数もそうですね、あとはその何勝何敗どれぐらい勝ったのかとか、そういう情報も
どれぐらい強い人かも配って歩けるわけですね。
そうです。あとはそのタイムアタックのゴーストだけではなくて、そのマリオカートチャンネルからですね、その人のミーとグランプリで対戦をすることもできるようになったんですね。普通はマリオとかルイージとか、そのキャラクターと一緒に自分が遊ぶんですけれども、
自分と世界のキャラクターとで対戦しますね。そこに混ざるんですか？
そこに混ざってくることがあるんですね。
じゃあ例えば今野さんと私がすれ違ったら、私が一人でグランプリを遊んでる時に今野さんが混ざっている。
そうですね。私が自分がよく遊んでる、カートの組み合わせとか、あとは私自身のミーが岩田さんの方に現れて、しかもちょっと特徴をいろいろつけているんですね。
特徴？
普段私が例えばコーラばっかりを使ってやたらコーラを当てるとか、人によってプレースタイルはいろいろあると思うんですけど、ダッシュでショートカットばっかりするとか、
先行逃げ切り型から追い込みで逆転型までいろいろありますね。
そうなんですよ。そういうある程度いろんなその癖とか特徴みたいなものをある程度表現できるようにしてまして、その人の割とプレースタイルがグランプリである程度再現できるっていうんですかね。ですからしかもちょっとやらしいというか、かなり自分に絡んできて、普段グランプリで遊んでるのとはまた違う楽しみ方っていうんですかね、そういうのができるんです。
なるほどね。じゃあグランプリを一人で遊ぶ時にも変化が出るんですね、すれ違っていくと。
そうですね、あとはおまけとしまして、今回マリオカートはフレームとかタイヤとか自分で組み合わせをするんですけども、実は最初ある程度ロックがかかっていて、パーツが全部全てあるわけではないんですね。実際にそのミーと対戦した時にそのミーに勝つことで、そのカスタムパーツを手に入るようなこともできるんですね。
ですからそうするとどんどんすれ違った方が
そうですね。
早くカスタムパーツも揃っていくっていうことなんですね。
ですからどんどんすれ違って、どんどん買ってでそっちでカスタムパーツをこうもう手に入れちゃうみたいなこともできますので、はい、あともう一つありまして、インターネット対戦なんですけれども、そのすれ違った要は人とですね、インターネットでも今回対戦するようになるんですね。
すれ違っていると、そのチャンネルから、この人とやりたいっていうと、その人が今マリオカートでインターネット対戦中ならそこに合流できたりするってことですか？
その通りです。
だからすれ違いがたった一度だけの出会いじゃなくて、そこからこう新しいライバル関係が生まれるかもしれない。
はい。なのですれ違いにしてもいろんなまた新しいコミュニケーションが生まれるようになればいいかなとは思っているんです。
次にいつの間に通信、任天堂 3DS の2つの特徴的な通信ですが、
やってきます。マリオカートも今回32コースの、レーストラックがあるんですけども、それぞれのゴーストが、大体速い人から本当に遅い人までこうピックアップされたものがこう日々やってきてどんどんここに溜まっていくんですね。
ちなみにそのデータはどこから来るんですか？
自分がですね遊びますよね。タイムアタックで遊んで、で、溜まったものがこう自動的にですね実は任天堂のサーバーにこうどんどん溜まっていくような仕組みなんです。
自分たちのプレイ履歴はいつの間にか任天堂のサーバーに共有され、そしてそれがいつの間にかその人のレベルに応じた速さのゴーストがみんなのところに配られる。
そうです。
当然あれですよね、腕に応じて自分にとってちょうどいい人が来るんですよね。
そうなんですが、ちょっと今回また変わったことをしていまして、マリオカート Wii の時はですね1対1なんですね。自分がそのダウンロードしたゴーストと1対1で戦うようなことをやりましたので、かなり自分の腕前に近いゴーストをダウンロードして戦うようなことをしたんですけれども、今回は実はですね同時に自分を含めて8台ですか。ですから自分とあとは7人分のゴーストが同時にですねタイムアタックをするようなことをやっているんですね。ですから
7台もゴーストがいるとどう見えるんでしょうか？
これはですね結構面白くてですね、本当に速い人から遅い人までが割とこうバランスよく実は配信されて一緒に走るんですけれども、本当にこの走る人はコースのライン取りも様々ですし、この人についていったら速いのかなと思いつつ、実はついていったら途中で遅かったりとか、あとは自分が今このコースで大体どれぐらい速いのかっていうのも一緒に走ることで本当に速いゴーストはもう一瞬にして本当に多分いなくなってしまいますし、大体真ん中ぐらいだったら本当に勝負ができるんですけど、そういう